Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session titled Leading the Charge Towards Sustainable Packaging. Now, both packaging and sustainability are major topics in the corporate world right now. And the transition to sustainable packaging is one that is both a critical initiative that involves many different groups of stakeholders. Now, some of these stakeholders are inside of the company, but consumers can be considered stakeholders here as well. Consumers demand reduced waste. They want companies to hit the ESG commitments they've made and incentivize innovation whenever possible. There are also regulatory requirements that compel companies to make either general or specific adjustments. And certainly, anytime you have this many things going on and the question gets asked, who is going to lead the charge and make sure that these changes get made? You know, procurement is going to be part of the answer. So today I'm going to be joined by two members of the Course-Centric team to discuss this topic in more detail. Kathleen Jordan is a director in advisory at Course-Centric, and Todor Naydenov is a consultant in advisory at Course-Centric. Now, in this conversation, we're going to talk about the various applications of sustainable packaging, think about some of those internal and external drivers that I mentioned, and then explain both the why and the how that all procurement professionals should be prepared to address in conversations. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring Kathleen and Todor up on stage with me. Hi, Kathleen and Todor. How are you both doing?
Hey, Kelly. Doing well. Good to see you.
Hi, Kelly. Good. Thanks so much for your invitation. It's really nice to be part of this and share some insights we have.
Absolutely. Now, I mentioned a lot of different things we're going to cover in my intro, but I always like to start with the big picture. Kathleen, you do have experience with sustainable packaging, but also with sustainability overall. Can you get us started today by just sort of giving us the macro situation that all sustainable packaging conversations are happening inside of?
Sure. Yeah, and I think just sustainability on a broad level can come in many shapes and forms, right? What does that really mean? There's so much to unpack. But I'd say what really drives the narrative around sustainability and the primary focus being on packaging is that there's one stat that always sticks out, and that a third of the waste that we generate here in the U.S. is actually packaging material based. And so with that in mind, obviously that brings packaging to the forefront for sustainability initiatives. And so that kind of always sticks with me. But I think when we're talking again about any sustainable related initiative that needs to be kicked off, I mean, it's all about planning. It's all about communication and really tapping into every source of intelligence that's going to help you determine what's realistic from a timing standpoint and from an implementation standpoint. So those are just some of the things that we see in the sourcing world in terms of challenges to be constantly navigating and revisiting again and again to ensure success at the end of the day. So yeah, I'll stop there because there's a lot to get into with that.
Now, I imagine with an initiative like this, where so many people right out of the gate would agree that it's a good idea, being realistic, as you mentioned, Kathleen, that's probably one of the top challenges. So, Todor, I'm curious about your perspective on that. When companies are kicking off these projects, what tend to be some of their primary objectives and challenges, and is being realistic one of them?
Yeah. So first, if you don't mind, I just want to make some addition to the first question, because I think it's really important to be understood quite well that the change towards sustainable solutions, and in particular now talking about sustainable packaging, should not always be all or nothing. I mean, we should be really clear that one size doesn't fit all, that something that works for one company, one business might not actually work for another business or another industry. So with that in mind, we have to be really mindful of the fact that, yes, for some businesses to go and do the whole change at once on the go, it could be required due to regulations, and it might actually lead to many benefits for the business.
Sure.
However, small steps towards achieving the final state of what we see for the particular company as a sustainable packaging solution might be actually more meaningful for many other businesses. Like small steps every quarter, every half term, every year can actually lead to this final objective that the business actually put in front of them. So just wanted to say that there is no a single solution that can be just put in place and for every business basically.
Well, and I like this idea that small steps can lead over time to big change.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, and it's, you know, we can certainly talk about the vision and the strategy associated with the move towards sustainable packaging, but I think in order for that to feel real, it's nice to address some tactics as well. So one of the earliest places that I can think of procurement being involved in this is perhaps running a sourcing project where packaging is either the focus or is involved, and wanting to try to evaluate current and prospective suppliers in terms of how relatively sustainable their packaging is. What might be some specific things that procurement should ask about, should look for? How do we start to think about asking detailed questions to gather more information?
Well, with that said, first things first is the procurement function within one business always needs to make sure that it's clear, as you mentioned earlier, on the primary objectives and potentially what challenges there might be. And then starting from those two, actually going to further kind of deep details, how you're actually vetting suppliers and what sorts of questions basically you're asking them. But talking about the primarily kind of objectives, there are probably a couple of things I would like to mention. They don't necessarily will be mentioned like as per their kind of importance, because ultimately this can vary from one business to another. But first thing I would like to mention as the primary objectives is basically responding to the consumer's pressure and demand towards greener and more sustainable solution. It's visible in the last decade or so that people are more inclined to actually purchase products that actually are sustainable, and not only that, but also come in a sustainable way. They've been delivered in a sustainable way, and their packaging also is sustainable. Of course, with that said, we have to be very mindful about the fact that this should not be affecting the supply chain resilience for the business and the overall business objectives. I mean, we cannot we should make sure that this is not negatively impacting the business as a whole. Then another primary objectives is basically acknowledge and react to the regulatory and the public concerns. Every business needs to make sure that they react and they are clear to what the regulations are in the specific regions, in the specific countries, and they actually adhere to them. And then third probably final objectives is kind of quite a broader one, where basically we're talking about reducing the waste. We're talking about conserve energy during the manufacturing. We're talking about utilizing renewable resources, increasing recycled material usage, and ultimately incorporating sustainable and more environmentally responsible approach to the packaging. So I think these are the three, if you say, areas and primarily objectives. And by saying this, we have ultimately a couple of primarily challenges, and most likely we always start with unclarity with regards to objectives and the timelines attached. Well, that's probably the first thing that people don't understand, that they need to have a very good clarity. What are their objectives and timelines attached? Then we're talking about absence or lack of data when it comes to current state. This is another big a big challenge as well. Not only the current state, but also what's the desired state. If you don't have a data to back up all of these statements and what you think it's your current and desired state, it's not really easy to get to this kind of desired state of sustainability towards either packaging or another part of the business. Also absence or lack of internal expertise is another big challenge, because yes, big businesses, well-known businesses within each in every industry, they have the resources, they have the subject matter expertise within the business, and they can work towards being more greener, being more sustainable. But smaller sizes businesses, they don't necessarily have all the resources, so they need to find a solution around that challenge as well. Another challenge might be looking at sustainability and sustainable packaging only on a local or departmental level, and due to lack of overall kind of strategy for transitioning to sustainable packaging, this might be a big challenge as well. If you don't have a cohesive approach, what you're working towards, it's really not that easy to achieve the final goals. And probably last thing I would mention as a challenge is it's a focus mainly on costs associated. And frankly, probably we should mention this, is that sustainable packaging doesn't necessarily mean the most cost effective and commercially viable solution, but ultimately when we talked about sustainability as a whole, the primarily focus should not be the cost reductions. It should be what the business leaves in the short, mid, and long term for the rest of the world, how they're impacting the planet, basically. Should be the main focus rather than the costs associated.
And I actually do think that's a really important thing to talk about. I mean, I think generally speaking, procurement knows, regardless of what the business objectives are, the more constraints and requirements you add to a project, the chances that you're going to be able to pick the least expensive solution start to diminish.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about sort of the implementation of one of these programs. And Kathleen, any kind of change always comes with its challenges. But I imagine that depending on the exact packaging we're talking about and how directly it connects with the company's revenue stream, procurement is going to have to work with a lot of different teams internally when this more sustainable packaging is brought into the picture. Are there any specific challenges, things to be aware of, or even specific groups in the company that procurement should be more aware of having contact with as either existing suppliers transition to more sustainable product or as sustainability focused suppliers are introduced to the company for the first time?
Yeah, there's a lot. I actually wanted to go back to some of what Todor was saying too, because if we break down again one of these initiatives and think about all the parties, I think the one player in the entire initiative, or set of players, let's say, that can be sometimes overlooked, is the supplier community.
Yes.
And so when I mentioned kind of the planning phase, right, and how critical that is, there needs to be valuable input coming from your current supply base, as well as, let's just say alternatives that you're exploring as well through an RFI process or whatever it may be. But while there's internal teams that are going to need to collaborate and such, you need to kind of lean on your suppliers as well a great deal to really explore what's possible. And so I think even because the company may have a plan, right? But if there's no real input into that plan from the suppliers delivering as part of that plan, then that's what needs to be highly considered. And so that's really the proper starting point before even the broader internal team is engaged, just so that plan can be then presented to the wider group as to everyone's role. Now, some internal stakeholders may be engaged to pull that plan together, right? And then there's an execution team that makes the internal team bigger to make it happen and to implement it. So there's going to be, kind of the team's going to grow over time post planning, obviously for the execution support. But just wanted to talk about that importance of the suppliers, and the mechanism there could be, again, RFIs, getting that market intel in the door, but also thinking about the supplier relationship management best practices that should be leveraged, the ongoing dialogue that needs to happen with your supply base to really determine what's possible at the end of the day, or if there needs to be, if we need to look beyond the current supply base as well, because that's going to probably increase the timeline associated with the initiative if your current supply base is a bit limited with what they're able to deliver upon.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too. And I know some categories, this certainly sounds like it's an example of one where expertise really is critical. It's maybe not enough for procurement to just come in and be excellent with the process and good with project management. It sounds like a really solid upfront discussion about certainly project level roles and responsibilities, but what is all the information we need to gather? What intelligence do we have access to? And then figuring out internal resources, figuring out the role that suppliers can play in informing the team. I'm also wondering if it makes sense to have at times a customer feedback loop, so that the company is doing their very best to come up with a product spec, come up with a sustainable alternative to something that maybe in the past has been used, but making sure that when that packaging reaches the customer, it's not having a detrimental effect on their overall experience. Todor, is there a way, or have you seen teams that make sure they get the voice of the end customer, whether the company is B2B or B2C, right? Because there's this sort of different points of contact with the packaging. But is it advisable when changing out the spec to make sure that moisture's not having an adverse effect, or something isn't protecting the product as well as it needs to with that final person in the consumption supply chain?
Wow, that's a great question. I can certainly tell that there needs to be a closed loop. The consumers need to be brought into the equation. And I would like to say that yes, big size companies, they have a larger teams. They have product development teams, they have product management teams, they have quality assurance, they have all of these different departments actually assuring to gather the necessary feedback and being able to work towards more sustainable solutions, in particular in the packaging. However, small sizes businesses, they don't have that. And it's really interesting. I would like to share some personal experience. Literally a couple of years back, I used to manage the entire supply chain for a consumer electronic company, and it was me running the whole project towards sustainability around the packaging and reshaping the packaging of the product. And while I was working this, and again, we didn't have the subject matter expertise inside because the company was a smaller size. It was a very important part of the whole process that I needed to actually talk with our suppliers. And where Kat actually mentioned just minutes ago how important it is to have a good communication and understanding what suppliers can do, how they can help you out throughout this process. And then I remember back in the days, we ran a survey throughout our customer base, and I was impressed, to be honest, that about 20-25% of the people that took part of that survey, they say, well, we'll be more inclined to buy product again from your company, to recommend your company, and be even happier with the overall experience if your product was coming in a more sustainable packaging.
Interesting.
That was a big news for us, to be honest. Not news, but it was a big statement by the consumers, and we actually took it on board. We changed entirely the packaging of that particular product. We took all the plastic away. We used at the first stage all paper. Second stage, we actually used recycled paper. And you cannot believe how many consumers were writing emails and saying, we're really proud that we bought the product from a company that really cares about sustainability through their packaging and their products. So I would say it's very important. It's very important to listen to your customers, because it is important. It's important for every single one of us to make sure that they do something, really, even a small step that helps this bigger change. That big solution and a goal to leave something for our children and grandchildren, a better world to live, basically.
No, that's an excellent example. And you can see where that would reinforce, where you ask for feedback, you put the changes into practice one step at a time, right? You can definitely see where that would lead to increased customer loyalty. Now, we've talked a lot about the changes that procurement may need to drive, the decisions the companies will need to make. But you can't measure progress if you haven't benchmarked where you're beginning.
Yeah.
Todor, where would you recommend companies, procurement teams start when they're trying to benchmark how sustainable their packaging is before one of these projects begins?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I would probably, in a way, repeat myself in the first part of the answer, is that companies first need to ensure they know where they are at the moment, where they need to make sure that they know what their current state is, and then have a clear vision what is the journey they need to go through, and the second part is actually do your research, do your homework in a way, and make sure that you know who are the companies, which are your competitors, what is the best-in-class performers within your industry, to make sure that you actually competing with and comparing yourselves to the best-in-class. But I'll be honest with you, it's not only having the best-in-class examples. Ultimately, we can talk about Apple, Google, and huge other companies, well-known brands, but a smaller side businesses cannot necessarily achieve these best-in-class results. But that's why you have to look around you, look who are actually your main competitors, and probably they should be the one to look around. And then once you establish the company's objectives and targets towards more sustainable packaging, you have to make sure that this doesn't obstruct basically the healthy performance of the business. And I really gonna stress out this healthy performance, because whatever you do, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that this doesn't obstruct what the business goals are and how the business perform quarterly, annually, because at the end of the day, the business needs to perform well to in order to grow, in order to be able to put in place all of these initiatives. And then also, it's probably important to mention that there are many businesses nowadays that do their researches, but also they actually incorporate throughout their process and their decision-making process a third-party sustainable risk management tools, which actually help people to make an informed decisions. Because sometimes you wouldn't necessarily have all the information you need, but using third-party tools, they can help you, they can give you the data, they can guide you through the process, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's a human decision. It's somewhere someone that needs to speak with his team and just make these calls. But ultimately the data, it's important to have in order to make a good decisions at the end.
Yeah. Now, to that point on data, and it's interesting because you had mentioned earlier that it's not just about the material that the packaging is made of, it's the production process as well that you want to be sustainable. Are there any specific KPIs or data elements that companies need to make sure they're collecting so that they can benchmark, whether that's about the product itself or the production process that's being used?
Well, certainly there are KPIs around that, and first, because the companies are more and more interested into sustainability, more interested towards more sustainable solutions and packaging as of an example, but also because of the regulators within states, countries, and regions. They actually they first have their mandatory regulations that you just have to follow, and because you have to follow them, you have to be able to gather the data and submit that data on a quarterly, annually basis. But they also have some certain regulations that are not mandatory, but they're advisable. They say, okay, you're not mandatory to do that, but this can help you achieve this and this. With that said, every single business, I think, should work towards a specific gathering of specific data and KPIs, and all of this. They're always gonna run through giving you the information for what your strategy is, right? Because we all come to this. What we should consider, because you mentioned KPIs, but yes, what sorts of KPIs, what sorts of data we need to be looking into when making these sorts of decisions, and all of this I would say it will be tied to these 5R pillars for sustainability, talking about reuse, reduce, recycle, renew, and redesign or reproduce. So basically, these are the 5 important pillars for the sustainable sustainability and sustainable packaging. I would say, and the KPIs and the targets and metrics that every business puts for them in front of themselves, they have to be arranged around these 5 R's and the strategies around it. And quick example of a strategy might be just very as simple as shipping a smaller packaging, shipping a smaller package, shipping a reusable package. It might be shared disposal and recycling best practices throughout the supply chain with your partners, with your vendors, with your suppliers. Listen to your customers. It might be redesign packaging currently used. There might be a better version of your packaging, and you have to collate the data for that. Recycled packaging materials utilization is another thing important. What sorts of materials use? What is the percentage of these materials? Can you find a better raw material to use? Then it might be just, again, as simple as reducing the overall packaging throughout the supply chain. Do you really need all of that packaging in the different stages of delivering your services or products to end consumers? And probably last thing that comes to my mind is using manufacturing partners with sustainable practices, where basically they are out there, suppliers, they're manufacturing partners, they're definitely companies that will be more than happy working with you towards this, finding this more sustainable solution for your business, basically.
Yeah. Now, Kathleen, we started this conversation today talking sort of some big picture around this category. And I actually think we have an opportunity to sort of bookend here by looking at big picture, but in a slightly different way. Certainly around sustainable packaging, but sustainability in general is a huge visibility opportunity for procurement. And so if I can just ask you to sort of share a few general thoughts around how, yes, there are more complexities associated with these types of initiatives, especially when regulations are involved. But there's also going to be a lot more maybe C-level visibility, maybe opportunities to build relationships with other parts of the business. Whenever sustainability comes into something, is there anything procurement should be thinking about in terms of how they can leverage the opportunity to generate good above and beyond the project that can help procurement forge those stronger relationships, maybe improve internal brand through the opportunity to address something that's important to so many people within the company?
Yeah, I think what procurement, one of the major skill sets that procurement brings to the table is being able to effectively manage a project timeline and the communication that goes along with all that. And even there's we at Corecentric, really focus around too is whatever change is coming, whether it's getting ready for technology and adopting that technology or a new process needing to be, rolled out. Procurement professionals, can be effective in being change agents for an organization on a broader scale beyond just, again, the changing of a product. So it's really a mindset that needs to be shifted in some cases, and being able to drive advocacy and find even how do you build rapport with different internal stakeholders that will help drive that change. I think procurement's able to have those thoughtful conversations and to build up the team effectively, so that everyone's headed in the right direction. So I think that's what procurement can deliver, in a valuable way beyond just kind of the day-to-day, sourcing and gathering of intel that will support the initiative. So that comes to mind. And then I think procurement as well, elevating the brand. I think there's just some examples that can be shared. Again, if we're talking about, let's say there is a bit of a brand story to tell, I think procurement can help kind of how did we make this happen? And I think it would would help, even if there's a marketing angle. Some of that real world example could bring it to life a little bit more for the customer to really kind of see the effort that goes into these types of initiatives. Because again, there's got to be a starting point somewhere. What does that really mean? And how do we get from point A to point B, to listen to the customer and actually follow through for them?
Excellent. Well, Kathleen and Todor, this has been a really interesting conversation about a category that I know impacts lots of different companies. Thank you both so much for being with me to share your perspective, share your expertise, and talk about this important topic.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you so much.
And thank you as well to everybody that has joined us either to watch or to listen in. Please explore the other resources available to you on artofprocurement.com. You can check out other upcoming events, podcasts, written content, and live sessions like this one. Thank you so much for being with us, everybody. Take care.